The book of James is one of my favorite texts in our New Testament. The reason I say this is because I'm into practical application. I enjoy figuring out how to do something, and then figuring out how to do it better. The book of James is packed full of practical how-tos of our faith, which, if applied to our life, help us to do and live out our faith better. As James begins his letter, perhaps written to Jews who understood the necessity of following God's law, he ties together following the rules and righteousness. By accepting Jesus' love, by welcoming a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, by following the laws God gives to us, Jesus allows us to know God's gift, not just the gift of forgiveness, but also the gift of righteousness by grace through faith. But James didn't believe that grace was a gift meant to just be accepted. He understood grace necessitates a response. Our scripture for this week is clear that anger and quick speech are not the response for which God is hoping. Anger, which is rooted in selfishness or pride, quick speech, which is only driven by impulse or by fear, these things do not accomplish or produce righteousness. They fight against it. So James encourages patience and humility in our faith. Work on being slow to speak. Work on slowing down the mental and emotional trains that move us often too quickly into anger rather than grace. Remember that grace is perhaps the most perfect form of patience. God's love for us is patient. God knows we will fall short, but is patient with us and offers us more grace. This week, as we consider relationships, we remember that God's gift of salvation through Jesus is rooted not in anger or quick speech, but in patience. Patience for each other, particularly in relationships, is all about follow-through, not just intent. About halfway through our scripture for this week, James offers us a practical reminder that one of the ways we give thanks for God's patience is by remembering to share God's message of grace and love and patience for all people. In verse 22, James says something like this: "Do not just be hearers of the message of God and deceive yourself into thinking hearing it was enough. Do what it says." Take a few moments in your group to chat about how often you actually do what it says as it pertains to listening and to anger with your spouse, your partner, your parents, your kids, with your family. Feel free to talk together about the amount of time you spend listening as opposed to speaking. What do you hear when you listen? Does listening, in fact, call you closer together and to God? I'll be back with some closing remarks in a few moments. When we teach ourselves to be slow to anger in our relationships, we learn patience is much more than a virtue. It's a gift in connection. And herein lies a secondary benefit of slowing our anger. When we listen and are patient with one another, we actually have ears to hear needs being spoken. We get to hear not only personal needs of the one who is speaking, but also the concerns they are being called toward themselves. As James is talking about bridling or controlling our tongues as a mark of our religious nature, he immediately follows in verse 27 by saying that a more pure religion than speaking quickly is serving quickly, particularly orphans and widows. So, how many orphans and widows do you know that you can serve today? Well, here are a few examples. When have you heard your spouse, your child, your friend tell you about an area of their own life where they feel orphaned? Where do you hear that anger, perhaps even your own, has left someone feeling abandoned? Do you know any widows? Has a death or loss of connection to income, insurance, home, or livelihood left a friend feeling as though some part of life has died and left them widowed or alone? Yes, there are literal widows and orphans all around us. And any time we can replace our anger with care for those who are in need, that's a holy moment. In this series, as we talk about our relationships, there are widowed and orphan hopes and dreams about fulfillment and meaning all around us. Often it's not only just being heard, but seeing that together our lives can still make a difference, that we sense we can become our true selves in relationship together. So, what anger or fear has stopped you from listening? What would you say if you knew that you could be heard? When was the last time you talked with God about all the widows and orphans around or in you that keep you from relationships in their purest form. Listening and being patient transforms us and helps us to serve others, both those we are in relationship with and those we are being called toward together. Here's a final thought. James seems to think these relational principles are so foundational that to forget them would be like forgetting who you are. Don't forget who you've been called to be. And with regard to this study in the days that come next, don't forget who you've been called to be together.